Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Small Triumph Sports Library and Archives. Today I'm going to share a review of an important book on Triumph cars. This book right here, Triumph Cars in America by Michael Cook. First, I want to emphasize, for those of you who may not be aware, the importance of the book's author, Mike Cook, to our understanding of Triumph cars, and especially Triumph's history in the United States. Cook began working for Triumph in the U.S. In 1958, and he went on to work for Triumph through to the end of Triumph's presence in the U.S., with the exception of a brief stint in the middle where he left Triumph to work in the oil industry and then returned to Triumph. I have a very strong sense that even during that period when he was working in the oil industry, his heart was still at Triumph. Cook was a motorsports enthusiast, and he was involved early in the Triumph club scene in America. After Triumph was done in the United States, he went on to work for Jaguar, and he was involved with various automotive organizations and publications, especially but not exclusively by any stretch of the imagination, those devoted to Triumphs. Cook was long involved with the Vintage Triumph Register. That organization was founded in 1974. It is the oldest American organization devoted to the history, preservation, and enjoyment of all Triumph sports cars. And the Vintage Triumph Register absorbed the factory-sponsored Triumph Sports Owners Association that had been something of Cook's baby for a long time, but it was officially ended with the last of the TR7s and TR8s in 1981. For many years, Cook edited the Vintage Triumph Register's publication, its magazine, which is called The Vintage Triumph. Sadly, Cook passed away in 2018, and you can find many tributes to him online. A nice, concise one is actually on the Hemmings Motor News website, but there are others out there as well. There was one on the Jaguar Land Rover website. Just doing a little bit of research and looking around, I noted that one automotive journalist said of Cook, his passing is like a library burning down. It's hard to imagine a higher compliment when it comes to one's impact on a field. Of course, a lot of us, when we go, would not only like to be known for having an impact on our profession or hobby or what have you, but we would also like to be remembered as good people. And by all accounts, Cook was a wonderful, well-liked people person. I never had the privilege of meeting Cook in person, but I did correspond with him briefly in 2008 when I published an article in the Vintage Triumph. And even in those brief exchanges, he came off as incredibly warm and friendly and encouraging. And really those kinds of qualities really come out in his prose and all of his writings, his books, his articles, and things like that. Now, Cook, of course, actually wrote a key book for those of us who are interested in Spitfire and GT6 history, and that is this book on your screen here. The Triumph Spitfire is the title of it. It was published in 1981. It's a small paperback book. This is actually the first full book on the subject that I got after I got my Spitfire. Because I was 19, and its format and low cost made it highly accessible. And I read this book from cover to cover when I was a kid, and I've returned to it from time to time over the years. As you might expect, a good bit of the material in the Triumph Spitfire book gets repeated in some fashion in the Triumph Cars in America book. So here's the book that's our focus for this video, Triumph Cars in America, published in 2001. It is, like a lot of key Triumph books, out of print, but you can generally find copies on eBay or through Amazon sellers and such for around $40 to $50, with some people asking for more because, well, there's always someone who is asking for more. Now, I did not run out and immediately get this book when it was published. I'm sure I noted its publication because I'm sort of constantly browsing Triumph titles. I think at the time it came out, I was a little bit more obsessed with motorcycle touring. And so I did not actually get this book until this past summer. It's a great read, and I highly recommend it. Not only is the content interesting and engaging, but the book is chock full of black and white photos, seemingly a combination of photos from the Triumph/British Leyland archives, as well as some of Cook's personal photos. Now, Cook does his due diligence in the book, and he goes back and talks about Triumph in America going back to its earliest days in the American market. And he does a good job with that. But the book really comes to life as Cook begins to recount the years after he started working for Triumph in 1958. And of course, the main story ends with the demise of Triumph in the United States in 1981. With the last of the TR7s and two TR8s being produced and sold. The book wraps up pretty quickly from there. Cook devotes a paragraph or two to the Triumph acclaim. And he wraps up the book talking a little bit about the status of the Triumph name at the time that the book was written. Here, I really just want to note a few things that really struck home for me as I was reading the book, and some things that I learned, and hopefully maybe some things that may pique your curiosity and give you a sense about whether this is a book that you would want to read and have on your shelf. So, first and foremost, when I was reading this book, I really got a stronger sense than I have from some other books that I've read, of just how small a company Triumph was, relatively speaking, especially compared with some of the larger automobile companies of its time. I also got a very strong sense of how complicated the import car game was in the 1960s and 1970s in particular, since that gets a lot of focus in Cook's book, but I'm sure it goes back even earlier than that. The logistics were kind of interesting, with Triumph, again, being a relatively small company and relying on distributors, and some of the problems that derived from that. I think we all know about Triumph's periodic labor and quality control problems, but we get the perspective on that from within the American operation in Cook's book. Also, we get a sense of how sometimes challenging and frustrating it could be to get the factory to respond to the priorities and desires of drivers in the American market. I can't remember if it's precisely in this book or something that I read elsewhere, but I know that at one point Cook talked about the fact that Triumph did not have an engineer that was based in America. And, it wasn't until, I think, much later on that even Jaguar did. So a lot of times when there were problems specific to the cars in terms of American traffic or the American climate, it was hard to get the factory to listen and respond quickly or effectively. There's a lot in the book about what Triumph and British Leyland did in introducing new cars, what they did at the major automobile shows, such as the New York International Auto Show. On your screen there is an image of the 1963, of the Triumph display, of course, at the 1963 New York International Auto Show. And Cook also talks a good bit, and it's pretty interesting, about how new models were introduced to dealers and to the public. On the screen there are a couple of pages that talk about the introduction of the GT6. There are also numerous accounts of and anecdotes about marketing gimmicks, publicity stunts. Include stories about how celebrities such as Alan Alda and others were in the mix. I think most people who know anything about Triumph history know that Triumph famously ran commercials during MASH in that show's heyday. And Triumph produced marketing materials featuring Alan Alda. Cook talks a little bit about behind the scenes information in terms of the fact that apparently Alda lived in New Jersey and would sometimes pop over to Triumph headquarters. So there are interesting anecdotes about that. And of course, Cook talks about other sort of celebrities and folks who were involved in Triumph marketing. Speaking of which, one of the things that I really enjoyed learning from the book was about the marketing team, Bruce McWilliams and his wife, Jimmy McWilliams. They were involved with PR marketing at Rover at the time that Rover joined Leyland, came on the way to becoming British Leyland. And Bruce McWilliams is a really very interesting and important figure in Triumph history. So when the merger happened and Rover came over, Bruce McWilliams and Jimmy McWilliams began to work with Triumph. They had a reputation for creating quirky advertising at Rover, and they brought that style to Triumph. Jimmy McWilliams actually left British Leyland and went on to work for an American automotive company, I think at the end of 1969. But Bruce McWilliams remained with Triumph through to its end. So he was involved the whole time. People with TR250s probably know that Bruce McWilliams was really responsible for the styling of the TR250. Apparently, he went over to England and saw the TR250 and was horrified that the car looked the same as a TR4, just had a different badge on it. And so he was responsible for putting together the appearance package for the TR250, including the stripe across the nose and the black and yellow cooling hoses and things like that. In fact, the bottom left there is the image of the TR250 with a variety of different styling elements on it for consideration as they were working on what kind of appearance they wanted the TR250 to have. So Bruce McWilliams is important for that reason. But also he was involved in some later styling efforts, special editions such as the Southern Skies edition of the TR7 and things like that. So I really enjoyed learning about Bruce and Jimmy McWilliams, and Bruce McWilliams actually wrote the foreword for the book, as you could see in the previous image. Cook also goes on to talk about the importance of motorsports and how motorsports was used to try to sell the cars. We have on the pages I'm showing there, the image on the left is of Cass Kasner. But the factory was involved in racing, and then of course there were private racing teams that were running Triumphs on the track, and Cook really talks about how Triumph tried to take advantage of all of those efforts in its marketing. I don't think that's new to anybody, but you get some nice details with regard to that. One of the last things I wanted to talk about with regard to the book is this sidebar. It's kind of a text box. It is something that's not part of the main text, but it appears in a particular chapter. And I found it really interesting because it provides some important context. So this is actually Mike Cook, and he is writing about some notes that an automotive journalist took about the status of Triumph and European sports cars in general in the late 1960s. So I just want to read a little bit from this. I'm going to skip around some because I'm not going to read the whole thing. I think that would be excessively boring as opposed to just ordinary boring. But I want to read through some of this, and then I'll make a few comments. So this is what Cook writes. Ron Wakefield was the respected technical editor and editor of Road and Track magazine for a number of years in the 1960s and 1970s. Fully aware of what the auto industry was doing worldwide, Ron was deeply interested in trends and developments. After his first drive in the TR250, he made some insightful notes, still on file at the magazine's offices. His reflections accurately describe the sports car's state at that time and its fate for years to come. You know, Ron Wakefield writes, as I was driving home in that thing last night, it suddenly came to me what's wrong with the sports car field today. He's writing in the spring of 1968. The best cars from Europe today are sedans. They've kept them up to date, really have some good ones, but the sports cars are neglected. How many sports cars below $3,500 can you think of that you'd have at all? Ron then listed how he felt about the British sports cars then available. The GT6, he wrote, pretty decent, but still a cobble job. MGB, he wrote, cart springs and a crash first gear. Healy, he wrote, dead, and it costs as much as a Corvette. Sunbeam Tiger, he wrote, no value for money. Then he took on the TR. He wrote, this TR250 is a real relic of the past, with its cobbled up rear suspension, rattles and squeaks, noisy top. I wouldn't pay $3,000 plus for anything less than the latest state of the art. If this keeps up, the sports car may be on its way out. Cook writes, Ron Wakefield had his crystal ball perfectly tuned. Far from becoming more modern over the following 2 decades, only the very expensive open two-seaters stayed anywhere near the leading edge in automotive engineering. The popular British brands stuck with their 1960s engineering until, sales dropping and profits dwindling, they simply disappeared. Meanwhile, tidy, attractive, high-performance sedans and coupes became the trend of the 1970s and 1980s. Whoever thought Triumph could restore performance later was doing some wishful thinking. That, by the way, is what Triumph said as they sort of made quick fixes to meet emissions. The engineers said they would restore performance later. Here, Cook says that that was simply wishful thinking. TR performance never came back to 1966 levels. Starting in 1968, it went steadily down. There was a momentary spike when the Spitfire 1500 came in, but even the all-new TR7 was no quicker than the TR6. Only the 1980 TR8, not in showrooms until 12 years after Wakefield's comments, had performance to match its contemporaries, and by then the financially devastated Jaguar Rover Triumph Limited could not afford to build them. The reason I found these comments so interesting is that in my mind, and I wasn't born when Wakefield wrote these comments, I was born several years after and obviously wasn't keenly aware of automotive developments through the 70s. But the impression that I had was that Triumph really started falling behind maybe 3, 4, 5 years later than they actually did, because according to Wakefield, they were already getting way behind the curve in early 1968. They were already way behind. So that was just kind of an interesting perspective on there. And of course, Cook's book really charts how Triumph fell further and further behind. Emissions regulations choking the engines, and Triumph and British Leyland in general really did not have the money to develop things the way that they should have. And so it was a very difficult and painful decline. I think everybody knows by the end of the run, the stock 1980 Spitfires were, at about like 48 horsepower or something like that. So it was a really sad end for cars that were, affordable and enjoyable and had pretty good performance when they were launched. And by the end, they were in a sad state overall. One other thing I'll mention is that there actually is some maddeningly corrupt text in this book. There's a passage in which Cook is talking about a dispute between Triumph and the EPA over MPG figures. And it's on the bottom of page 137. There's a line or some words missing, and it doesn't make any sense. And I wish that I had access to the original manuscript so I could see what it's supposed to say there. Regardless, the book is really chock full of a lot of interesting stories and anecdotes. Cook writes in his introduction that his preface, that his children encouraged him to write down his stories. He would tell stories about his Triumph days, and his children were like, "Write it down, Dad." And we owe them a tremendous debt of gratitude that they encouraged him to document these stories so that we have them. Finally, among many other worthwhile things, this book is a true reminder of the fact that Triumph legends are rapidly leaving this mortal coil. I already mentioned that Cook passed away in 2018. I did a little bit of research. Bruce McWilliams passed away in 2006. Jimmy McWilliams passed away in 2020. Kaz Kasner, I showed the image of him, passed away in 2021. All very sobering. But these legends have left us with tremendous stories. Thankfully, they've documented a lot of their knowledge for posterity, and they've left us a living legacy with the surviving cars. And it's up to us to keep this thing going. So Triumph Cars in America is a fantastic book. If you're interested in Triumph history, and especially Triumph history in the United States, I recommend getting your hands on a copy and reading it. I have highlighted some things, but there's a lot more in this book that is of tremendous value. So hopefully this review, if you've made it through it, has been helpful overall. Thank you for watching. I hope to be back in about a week with another video. If you enjoy this kind of thing, I hope that you'll consider subscribing. In the meantime, take care. Like I said, try to have another video up pretty soon. Thank you.